The metal tray hit the floor with a sound that cut through every conversation in the room. A young waitress stumbled into the edge of a table, catching herself with both hands, and two large men laughed like it was the funniest thing they had seen all week. One of them raised his phone and kept it aimed at her face, while the other told her to say sorry out loud to the camera in front of everyone. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. In the corner booth, a man sat with a cup of coffee that had gone cold a long time ago. He watched, and he had seen enough. The Route 66 diner sat on the edge of a two-lane highway, about 12 miles outside of Phoenix, the kind of place that had been there long enough that nobody remembered who built it. The sign out front had one dead letter, and the parking lot had more cracks than pavement. But the coffee was hot, and the booths were wide, and people kept coming back. It was the sort of place where regulars knew each other by first name, and strangers got left alone. And that arrangement had worked just fine for a long time. Emily Carter had been working the afternoon shift there for just over a year. She was 22, still taking classes 2 evenings a week at the community college across town, and sending part of every paycheck home to help with her younger brother's school expenses. She moved through the diner with the kind of efficiency that came not from training, but from necessity. She could carry 3 plates, remember 5 orders, and notice a customer's empty glass all at the same time. She did not complain. She did not ask for sympathy. She just worked. Most of the regulars liked her. Old Walter, who came in every Tuesday for the meatloaf, always left a folded $5 bill under his coffee cup. The couple from the hardware store 2 blocks down always asked how her classes were going. Emily appreciated them more than she ever said out loud. The tips were not great, but they were steady. And steady was what she needed right now. That Tuesday afternoon, the diner was about 2/3 full. A family with 2 young kids sat near the window. A group of contractors occupied the long table in the middle. A few solo customers were scattered along the counter. And in the far corner booth near the back wall, where the light was dim and the noise from the kitchen was just a low hum, a man sat alone with a cup of coffee and nothing else on the table in front of him. His name was Jack Reynolds. He looked to be somewhere in his late 30s, though something about the way he carried himself made him seem both younger and older than that, depending on the moment. He wore a plain gray jacket over a dark shirt, and his boots were worn but clean. He had not brought a book or a phone or a newspaper. He simply sat, hands wrapped loosely around the mug eyes, moving slowly and steadily across the room, the way a person's eyes move when they are used to keeping track of things. He had been coming in 2 or 3 times a week for the past month, always the same booth, always the same order. Emily had served him a dozen times. He tipped, well, said thank you, and never asked for conversation. She had no reason to think about him as anything other than a quiet regular. She had no way of knowing what he had done before he came to Phoenix, or why he had stopped doing it. She just refilled his coffee when it got low, and left him alone the same way he seemed to want it. They came in at 20 minutes past 3. Derek Vaughn pushed through the front door first, and Tyler Brooks followed close behind him, already laughing at something between them. Both men were large. Not the kind of large that came from physical work, but the kind that came from size alone. Derek had a thick neck and a short, aggressive way of moving, like he expected everything around him to get out of his path. Tyler was taller, leaner, with a phone already in his hand, and a grin that did not reach his eyes. The smell of alcohol came in with them. They took a booth near the center of the room, the worst possible place, visible from every angle, surrounded by other customers, right in the middle of everything. Emily was already carrying plates to the contractor table when she saw them sit down. She recognized the type immediately. She had worked enough shifts to know exactly what certain kinds of customers looked like before they opened their mouths. She finished delivering the food, smoothed the front of her apron, and walked over. "What can I get you?" she asked. Derek did not look at her when he answered. He read items off the menu, slowly changing his mind twice, then asked for something that was not on the menu, then acted put out when she said they didn't have it. Tyler was recording something on his phone the entire time, occasionally turning the camera toward Emily without asking. She kept her voice steady and wrote down the order, and went to put it in. When she came back with their drinks, Derek knocked his glass over before she could set it down. The water spread across the table and dripped onto the seat. He looked at the mess, and then looked at her like it was her fault. "You're going to clean that up, right?" he said. Tyler laughed and tilted his phone in her direction. Emily grabbed a towel from her apron and cleaned the table without saying anything. She brought a replacement drink. She went back to her other tables. She was professional about it, in the way that people are professional when they have learned that arguing makes things worse. But Derek and Tyler were not finished. Over the next 20 minutes, they called her over 6 times for a fork. They said was dirty for extra napkins they did not use for a side they had not originally ordered, and then claimed they had. Each time Tyler kept his phone raised, just slightly, watching through the screen. Each time other customers nearby glanced over and then looked away. Emily kept moving. She kept her expression even. She was doing the mental math that people in her position always do. How much longer? Until the shift ends. How much worse can this get? Is it worth saying something? She decided to say something when Derek grabbed her wrist as she was walking past. She stopped and looked at his hand and then at his face. "Please don't do that," she said. Derek let go, but he did not look embarrassed. He leaned back in the booth and crossed his arms. "You got a problem with how we're acting? Because from where I'm sitting, you've been rude since we walked in." Tyler turned the camera fully on her, now grinning. Emily set the tray she was carrying down on the edge of the table. "I've been nothing but polite to you," she said. Her voice was controlled, but her hands were not entirely steady. "I'd appreciate it if you'd let me do my job." Derek stood up. He was not asking for anything anymore. He shoved her shoulder with enough force that she stumbled backward into the edge of the adjacent table. The tray hit the floor. Plates cracked. Ice and water spread across the tile. The sound cut through the entire diner, and every conversation stopped at once. Emily caught herself against the table, both palms flat on the surface. She straightened up. Her face had gone pale. Derek stood with his arms loose at his sides, chin slightly raised, watching her like he was waiting to see what she would do. Around the room, nobody moved. The family near the window had gone completely still. The contractors stared at their food. A woman at the counter turned slightly away. The silence in the diner was the kind that means everyone is present, but no one is willing to be seen. Tyler stepped forward and positioned himself next to Emily, phone raised and camera running. He was close enough that she had to turn slightly to avoid being pressed against him. "Say sorry," he said. Voice easy and light, like he was asking for something reasonable. "Just say you're sorry for the attitude, and we can all move on." Emily did not move. She stood with her back straight and her jaw tight, looking at the phone screen inches from her face, understanding exactly what was happening, that the footage was being shaped, that whatever she said or didn't say was going to be edited into something that made her the problem. She understood it, and she still did not know what to do about it. "Say it," Tyler said again. His voice had not changed, which was somehow worse than if he had shouted. The diner stayed quiet. Nobody said anything. Nobody stood up. A child at the window table whispered something to his mother, and the mother pulled him gently closer without responding. Behind the counter, the cook had come to the kitchen doorway and was looking out, not moving. In the far corner booth, Jack Reynolds set his coffee mug down on the table. He did it slowly and without noise. He looked at Emily, at the way she was standing at the phone in Tyler's hand, at Derek, positioned behind her to cut off the space. He looked at the rest of the room, at the downturned heads and averted eyes. His expression did not change. He was not angry, not visibly. He looked the way a person looks when they have already made a decision and are simply moving toward it. He stood up. He came out of the booth and walked across the diner at a steady pace, not fast, not slow hands at his sides. He moved between tables without bumping anything. When he reached the center of the room, he stopped a few feet from Tyler and said nothing. For a moment, just looked at him. then at Derek, then back at Tyler. "Put the phone down," Jack said. His voice was low, and even not raised, the kind of voice that does not need volume to carry weight. Tyler turned and looked at him with the expression of someone who has never had a stranger walk up and say something like that to him in public. "Excuse me," he said. "You heard me," Jack said. He was not performing. He was not posturing. He was simply standing there looking at both of them with the same calm, settled stillness he had been carrying the entire time he sat in that booth. "Let her go do her job." Derek moved first, stepping forward and planting a hand flat against Jack's chest to push him back. "Walk away, old man," he said. "This doesn't involve you." Jack looked down at the hand on his chest. He did not step back. "Last chance," he said, quietly looking up at Derek. "Both of you." Tyler laughed and glanced at Derek like they were sharing a joke. Derek pushed harder. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. Jack moved with a speed and economy that made no sense for a man who had been sitting quietly in a corner booth for the past hour. Derek's arm was redirected, his balance broken, and before he fully understood what was happening, he was face down against the floor, with his wrist locked at an angle that made movement impossible. Tyler lunged forward and met the same result. One controlled motion, no wasted energy, and Tyler was on his knees with Jack's hand at the back of his neck, keeping him exactly where he was. The entire diner stared. Jack held both men in place without strain, the same calm expression on his face, like he was waiting for a bus. He looked toward the counter and said, "Someone call the police, please." A customer near the window already had her phone out. 3 people were dialing at once. Emily stood in the same spot she had been standing, the fallen tray still on the floor beside her, watching the man from the corner booth hold 2 men twice her size, completely still, without having broken a sweat. She did not know his name then. She did not know anything about him. But she was looking at him the way people look at something they cannot immediately explain. The police arrived 11 minutes later and took Derek Vaughn and Tyler Brooks into custody. The diner slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed, forks scraped against plates. The cook disappeared back into the kitchen. Jack returned to his corner booth, sat down, and picked up his coffee. It was cold. He drank it anyway. The police report took 40 minutes to complete. 2 officers worked the scene, while a third took statements from customers who were willing to give them. Most were. The woman near the window, who had called 911, described everything she had seen in careful detail. The contractor at the long table confirmed that Derek had initiated physical contact with Emily first. Even the cook came out of the kitchen and gave a statement, which he had clearly been rehearsing in his head since the moment Jack walked across the diner. Derek and Tyler were placed in separate patrol cars. Derek had a bruised wrist and a great deal to say about it, none of which the officers seemed particularly interested in. Tyler said less, but kept glancing toward the diner window like he was expecting something. Both men were transported to the precinct for processing. The charge was misdemeanor assault and disorderly conduct, not enough to hold them long, but enough to get them out of the building. One of the officers, a younger man named Holt, spent several minutes with Jack near the corner booth. Jack answered every question directly and without elaboration. He explained that he had observed Derek make physical contact with Emily, that he had verbally warned both men before intervening, and that he had used only the force necessary to restrain them until law enforcement arrived. Officer Holt wrote it all down and then looked up from his notepad and studied Jack for a moment. "You have some training," Holt said. It was not quite a question. "Some?" Jack said. Holt nodded slowly and did not press it further. He handed Jack a card with a case number printed on it and told him someone might follow up in the next few days. Jack took the card, folded it once, and put it in his jacket pocket. Emily had been sitting at the counter since the officers arrived, a glass of water in front of her that she had not touched. One of the officers had asked her twice if she needed medical attention, and she had said no both times. She had a bruise forming along her left forearm where she had caught herself against the table, but she kept it covered with her sleeve and did not mention it. When the last patrol car pulled out of the parking lot, she let out a breath that had apparently been waiting a long time to leave her body. She looked across the diner to where Jack was settling back into his booth. She picked up the glass of water, walked over, and stood at the edge of his table. "I don't know what to say," Emily said. Jack looked up at her. "You don't have to say anything," he said. She set the water glass down on his table anyway, went back to the counter and started cleaning up the broken plates from the floor. The diner stayed quieter than usual for the rest of the afternoon. People finished their meals and left tips that were larger than normal, the way people sometimes do when they feel guilty about something they did not do. By the following morning, the video was everywhere. Tyler had been recording before the confrontation began, and the footage captured everything: Emily being shoved, the tray hitting the floor, Jack walking across the diner, the 4-second takedown, and both men pinned and motionless on the ground, while Jack stood over them without visible effort. Someone had already clipped the most striking portion and posted it under a title referencing a veteran at an Arizona diner. The clip had been viewed over 400,000 times before noon. The original post identified Jack by name within a few hours. After that, it did not take long for someone to find his service record. Jack Reynolds, former Delta Force operator, decorated honorably discharged after 12 years of service, the kind of background that the internet treats like gasoline near an open flame. By early afternoon, the story had been picked up by 2 local news stations and 1 national outlet. The framing differed depending on who was telling it. The local stations ran it as a feel-good piece: a veteran steps up when no one else will. A young woman protected 2 bad actors taken off the street. The national outlet was more careful, noting that the incident raised questions about the appropriate use of force in civilian situations, and featuring a brief comment from a legal analyst who said that while Jack's actions appeared to fall within the bounds of lawful self-defense and defense of others, the speed and severity of the restraint techniques used could be viewed as disproportionate by some. That comment was enough. The comment section divided almost immediately into 2 distinct camps, and neither was interested in the other's perspective. One side called Jack a hero, said more people should be willing to do what he did, said the world needed men like him. The other side raised questions about vigilantism, about what kind of precedent this set, about whether a man with that level of combat training had the right to make unilateral decisions about force in a public space. Both sides were loud. Neither had been in the diner. Emily saw most of it from her phone during her break the next day. She read comments that praised her for standing her ground, and comments that suggested she had somehow provoked the situation. She put her phone face down on the counter and stared at the wall for a while. Then she went back to work because she had tables to cover, and the diner was not going to run itself. Jack did not have social media accounts. He found out about the coverage from his neighbor, a retired school teacher named Margaret, who knocked on his door that morning with a printed-out screenshot and a look of cautious concern. He thanked her, closed the door, and sat at his kitchen table for a long time. He was not surprised by the attention. He had not done what he did to be seen. But the attention had arrived anyway, and with it came the particular kind of exposure he had spent 2 years trying to avoid. He had a daughter to think about. Lily was 7 years old and in 2nd grade, and she did not know much about what her father had done before she was old enough to remember things clearly. He wanted to keep it that way for a while longer. He wanted her to know him as the man who made her breakfast and drove her to school and showed up to her soccer games, not as a headline or a thumbnail or a point of debate in a comment thread. The video made that harder. He called his attorney that afternoon, not because he thought he was in legal trouble. He had been careful, and the facts were straightforward, but because he wanted to know what his position was before anyone else started defining it for him. His attorney told him to stay quiet publicly, not to give interviews, and to let the story run its course. Jack said he understood. He had always been better at staying quiet than talking anyway. Derek Vaughn and Tyler Brooks were released on bail 36 hours after their arrest. The bail amount for each was set at $2,500, which their families paid without much delay. They were given a court date 6 weeks out and told not to contact Emily Carter or Jack Reynolds in any form. They did not follow that instruction particularly carefully. It started small. A car drove past the Route 66 diner twice on the evening after their release, slow enough to be deliberate gone before anyone could get a plate number. Emily noticed, but said nothing, told herself it could have been anyone. The next morning, she found a message on the diner's public social media page. Nothing specific. No direct threat, just words arranged in a way that made her stomach tighten. She showed it to her manager, who said he would report it. He did. The police logged it and said they would note it in the file. 2 days after that, Emily was walking to her car in the front parking lot after the evening shift when she noticed a truck parked across the street with its engine running. She could not see the driver clearly. She stood by her car door for a moment, key in hand, watching the truck. Then she got in and drove home without looking in the rearview mirror more than she needed to. She told herself that was fine too. Jack became aware that he was being watched on a Thursday afternoon. He noticed a car he did not recognize parked half a block from his house. For the second time in 3 days. Same vehicle, same position, different times. He did not approach it. He logged the make and color in his phone and took note of the partial plate number he could read from his front window. He called Officer Holt and gave him the information. Holt said they would look into it and encouraged Jack to call immediately if anything escalated. Jack understood what was happening. Derek and Tyler were not careful men, they had proven that. But they were angry men. And angry men who felt humiliated in public had a way of becoming unpredictable. Jack had seen enough of the world to know that the version of events that played out in a diner in broad daylight, with witnesses and police and a video record, was the simple version. What came next had the potential to be messier. He did not want a mess. That was the part people did not see in the footage, not the speed of his movements or the precision of his technique, but the fact that he had sat in that booth for a long time before he stood up. He had waited. He had looked for another way. He had watched the room for someone else to act first, and when no one did, he made the only choice left. But choosing it once in a controlled environment, with good lighting and a full room of witnesses, was different from navigating what came next, in parking lots and side streets, and the dark margins where there were no cameras and no one taking notes. He had a daughter in 2nd grade. He had a quiet life he had built carefully, piece by piece, around the edges of everything he used to be. He was not afraid of Derek Vaughn or Tyler Brooks. That was not the problem. The problem was that men who had nothing to lose had a way of making other people pay for it, and Jack had a great deal left to protect. He started paying closer attention to the rear of the diner on the evenings he went in. He started noting which cars sat too long in the same spot. He started being the last one to leave and the first one to notice when something was out of place. He was not looking for a fight. He was trying to make sure that if one came, it would not catch him standing still. It came on a Friday night in the parking lot behind the diner when the lights along the back wall were out and there was no one else around. They had not come alone. There were 5 of them. Jack had counted them before they finished closing the circle. Derek was there and Tyler beside him, and 3 others he did not recognize. Younger, harder-looking, the kind of men who got recruited for exactly this kind of errand. They had parked on the far side of the lot and come around the back of the building on foot, which meant they had planned the approach. The lights along the rear wall of the diner were out. Jack had noticed that 2 days ago and mentioned it to the manager, who had said he would get someone to look at it. Nobody had. Jack had his keys in his hand when they came around the corner. He stopped walking and took stock of the situation in about 2 seconds. 5 men spread across the width of the lot, cutting off the direct path to his truck. Derek had something in his right hand, a length of pipe or a bat, hard to tell in the dark. One of the others was holding what looked like a tire iron. Tyler had his phone out again, which meant either he was still making content or he wanted a record of what was about to happen, and neither option was good. "Thought you'd just walk away from all this," Derek said. He was about 15 feet out, moving slowly, letting the other men spread wider. "Thought you'd get to be the hero and just go home." Jack did not respond to that. He was already mapping the space, the distance between men, the angles, the obstacles. There was a dumpster to his left, and a concrete barrier at the back of the lot, and a narrow gap between two parked cars to his right that might be worth remembering. He was doing this the way he used to do it in places that were considerably worse than a diner parking lot in Phoenix, which was without panic and without hesitation, just clear calculation. The problem was the numbers. 2 he could manage without much difficulty. 3 was harder, but not impossible depending on positioning. 5 with 2 of them carrying weapons in low light, with no backup, that was a different equation. Derek closed the distance first, swinging wide and fast. Jack stepped inside the arc of the swing, took the impact on his forearm rather than his head, and drove Derek back into Tyler behind him. Both men stumbled. Jack put Derek on the ground and was already moving before Tyler could recover his footing. One of the 3 unknowns came from the left with the tire iron, and Jack took a blow to the shoulder that hit hard enough to send a shock of white through his vision. He absorbed it and kept moving because stopping meant losing, and losing was not an option he could afford tonight. He was fighting differently now than he had in the diner. In the diner, it had been clean and contained a controlled response to a manageable situation. Minimum force, no escalation. This was not that. This was 5 men who had come out here specifically to do serious damage, and the part of Jack that he had spent 2 years trying to quiet down had recognized that within the first few seconds and made certain adjustments. His movements were harder now, more decisive. He was not restraining anyone. He was eliminating threats in sequence and moving to the next one. He took another hit, this one across the back of his left leg, and went down to 1 knee. 2 of the men were on him immediately. He felt the weight of them and the specific sensation of losing ground. Not the kind of losing that meant defeat, but the kind that meant the margin was shrinking and the timeline was compressing. He drove an elbow back hard into the face of the man directly behind him and heard the result of that clearly. The man went down and did not immediately get back up. Derek had recovered and was coming back. Jack could hear him breathing heavy, furious, the sound of a man who had been embarrassed in public and had decided this parking lot was where he was going to get even. Jack got back to both feet and squared to face him. His shoulder was bad, and his left leg was not tracking. Right, and there were still 3 men standing, but he had fought in worse shape than this, in places where the stakes were considerably higher, and that knowledge was its own kind of resource. He was doing what he had told himself he would never have to do again. That was the part that sat heaviest, not the pain, not the odds, but the familiar feeling of the old machinery clicking back into place, the part of him that had been built for exactly this, and had never fully stopped being ready for it. He had wanted to leave that version of himself behind. He had been trying to. And here it was, as available as ever, as precise as ever, like it had simply been waiting. He kept fighting. The sirens came from 2 directions at once. Officer Holt had run the partial plate Jack gave him 3 days earlier and had not liked what came back. The vehicle was registered to a man with 2 prior assault charges who had a known association with Derek Vaughn. Holt had flagged it and requested a patrol increase in the area around the Route 66 diner for the following 72 hours. He had not told Jack about any of this because he did not want to alarm him, a decision he would later describe as probably the wrong call. The patrol car that came from the north end of the lot had its lights on before it turned the corner. The one from the south arrived 8 seconds later. 4 officers were out of the vehicles before the cars fully stopped. The men in the parking lot scattered in different directions, which turned out not to be a particularly effective strategy, given how small the lot was and how many officers were now in it. Derek Vaughn was found next to the dumpster where he had landed after the last exchange with Jack. Tyler Brooks was on his knees near the concrete barrier, hands already raised, the phone still in his hand. The other three were taken at different points around the perimeter of the lot over the next 4 minutes. None of them got further than the edge of the property. Jack was sitting on the rear bumper of his truck when Holt reached him. His jacket was torn at the shoulder, and his left leg was stiff, and he had a cut above his right eye that had bled enough to be visible, but not enough to be serious. He was breathing steadily, and he had both hands visible on his knees, which was a habit from a long time ago that he had never fully shaken. Holt looked him over and said, "You need an ambulance." "No," Jack said. Holt crouched down and looked at the cut above his eye. "You're going to want someone to look at that." "I know," Jack said. "I will." The investigation that followed moved faster than anyone expected, partly because there was substantial evidence, and partly because Tyler had been recording again. The footage from Tyler's phone, which was recovered and examined as part of the criminal case, showed the entire confrontation from the moment Jack came around the corner of the building. It showed who was where, who moved first, and what was in Derek's right hand, which turned out to be a section of steel pipe about 18 inches long. It showed Jack responding to incoming attacks each time, rather than initiating. Whatever Tyler had intended to do with that footage, it ended up being the clearest possible record of the fact that Jack had not gone looking for a fight. The investigation also pulled the diner's security footage from the original incident and conducted interviews with multiple customers who had been present that afternoon. What emerged was a pattern. Derek Vaughn and Tyler Brooks had been removed from 2 other establishments in the Phoenix area in the past 8 months for harassing service workers. One incident had resulted in a complaint that was never formally pursued. The other had been settled quietly after the business owner decided not to press charges. The Route 66 diner was not their first attempt at this, and Emily Carter was not the first person they had targeted. She was simply the first one who had someone in the room willing to stay. The new charges against Derek and Tyler were significantly more serious than the originals: aggravated assault, criminal conspiracy, violation of the conditions of their bail. Their attorney advised them to stop talking, which was the first reasonable advice either of them had received throughout the entire situation. They took it several weeks too late. The community response came in the way those things do, not all at once, but in accumulation. A local veterans organization released a statement expressing support for Jack and calling for the charges against him to be dropped, though there were no serious charges pending against him to begin with. Several customers who had been in the diner that afternoon gave interviews to the local news, and the tenor of those interviews was consistent. He warned them, they pushed, he responded. The legal analyst who had raised questions about proportionality in her initial commentary came back on air and said that in light of the full video evidence and the investigation's findings, her earlier concerns did not appear to apply to the facts as they were now understood. The district attorney's office confirmed publicly that Jack Reynolds would face no charges in connection with either incident. The statement was brief and factual, the way those statements usually are, but it said what needed to be said. Emily went back to work the week after the parking lot incident. Her manager had offered her paid time off, and she had taken 3 days, which was as much as she felt she could manage. She came back on a Tuesday, the same shift, the same section. Walter was there with his meatloaf and his folded $5 bill. The couple from the hardware store asked how she was doing, and she told them she was fine, and for the first time in a while she mostly meant it. She had given a statement to investigators and answered every question they asked, and when the cases against Derek and Tyler were fully filed and the record was complete, she found that she had done everything she could do, and that was enough. She still checked the parking lot before she walked to her car at night. She probably would for a while. That was not fear, exactly. It was just the new shape of how she moved through that particular space, and she suspected it would soften with time. About 2 weeks after the night in the parking lot, Jack came back to the diner on a Saturday morning. He came through the front door, same gray jacket, same quiet way of moving, But this time, he was not alone. A girl walked in beside him, 7 years old, with his same steady eyes and a bright yellow backpack hanging off one shoulder that was clearly too large for her, but that she wore with complete confidence. She went straight to the corner booth and climbed in and began arranging the sugar packets into a grid pattern on the table with the focused concentration of someone engaged in serious work. Jack sat across from her and nodded once to Emily when she came over with the coffee pot. Emily poured his coffee and looked at the girl, who looked back at her with calm, clear interest. "What's your name?" Emily asked. "Lily," the girl said. Emily smiled and asked if Lily wanted hot chocolate, and Lily said yes, please. And that was the whole of it. No announcement, no acknowledgement of everything that had preceded this moment. Just a man and his daughter in a corner booth on a Saturday morning. Sugar packets arranged in careful rows on the table, the coffee hot this time. The diner moved around them the way it always did. Orders called out plates, set down conversations, starting and finishing and starting again. Jack watched the room the way he always watched it, steadily, quietly, not looking for anything in particular, just aware. Lily had moved on from the sugar packets and was now drawing something in a small notebook she had produced from the enormous backpack. Some people in the diner recognized him. Most of them looked over once and then went back to their meals, which was exactly how Jack would have wanted it. He had not stood up in that diner 2 weeks ago because he wanted to be seen. He had stood up because someone needed help, and he was the only one in the room who was going to give it. That was the whole calculation. It had always been that simple. Heroes are not always the ones who want to fight. Sometimes they are just the ones who cannot sit still when it matters, the ones who have already counted the cost and decided it is worth paying. Jack Reynolds had paid that cost more times than he could count in places far from this diner, in service of things most people never had to think about. He had come to Phoenix to be done with all of that, to be a father and a neighbor and a man who drank his coffee in peace. He was still that man. He had just proven one more time that being that man did not always mean getting to stay in the corner booth.